Today we're going to talk a little bit about weapon manipulation. And so what we've done is we've taken this VTAC wall here, and we're going to use that as any form of a wall, or it could be a partner that you're working with, somebody or something you've got to get around. And so we're going to really focus hard on the different ways you can do weapon manipulation, both with a pistol and then with a rifle. We'll start with the pistol. We'll move on to the rifle from there. What we're going to do is we're going to give you some ideas of different ways to do it. None of these ways is the best way. The best way is the way that works for you based on the weapon you have, based on your own strength, your own arm's length, everything like that. So we're going to give you the goods and the bads of each of these techniques, and then we're going to work through those. Then you come to OVR and you try these techniques out and find which works best for you. So as I said, we're going to start with the pistol. On the pistol, the first thing is, what's your version of low ready? And we can go over and spend hours and hours discussing your version of low ready. But the bottom line on it is you've got to be able to manipulate your pistol to get it around a barrier, but at the same time manipulate it fast enough to get it back on target. And so I'm going to kind of cover really two different low readies to be able to manipulate your weapon. And then you can come into OVR and you can play with that and figure out which one works the best for you. So the first technique is, and again, this is a laser pistol. It's obviously very clear at this point. We can see the laser tip on the front. So the first low ready you're going to have is centered in the middle of your chest, pointing straight out, and you're locked in here. Your elbows are in tight. You can chicken wing a little bit, but you're in here. Your wrist is bent, and so you're already on target. So if something were to be a threat in front of you, it's easy to start shooting even before I get the pistol all the way out. I may not be accurate, but I'm pretty sure we could hit the body, the center mass at least. So from here, I can start pulling the trigger as I'm coming out and then get a better accurate shot once I'm fully extended. And then I can come back. That keeps it in tight for me and helps me in manipulation. The other technique you can do is you can lock your wrist. As you lock that wrist, you're kind of down here. And this allows you to kind of turn your body and see where you're shooting. And same thing, if I turn my body here, I can start to shoot as that weapon comes out and at least get near the target, if not on target, and then get a more accurate shot here. So those are essentially your two low readies. Now let's talk about how that works with manipulation around the barrier. So your first low ready technique, where you're centered middle of your chest. The problem with that going around this wall is it gets a little awkward to pull that back. That's the first thing, to get that back far enough to prevent that weapon from hitting on the wall. The second problem you're going to run into with this is that if you get in the habit of doing this around a wall, which is kind of okay, but if you happen to accidentally discharge, you're going to get splinters back at you. But if that's your buddy, you're flagging him. And we definitely don't want to do that. So that's part of the reason that I tend to still do the low ready with my wrist locked and down and just tilt myself down. So to see that technique, you're here, you're shooting. The weapon comes back, and as it comes back, you bring it down, sidestep, and then back up. And this avoids the habit of flagging, and so you can continue down and up with your pistol. Now that we've covered the pistol, we want to cover the rifle a little bit on the low ready. Low ready is pretty much the same no matter what with any rifle. That's up here. The difference is how do you maneuver and manipulate that weapon in different ways. And there's really three different techniques to do this. The first technique is sort of the old school technique. Now, regardless of the three techniques you use, you could still have your hand here or in that C grip. So compact or C grip doesn't matter with any of the three of these. Sometimes one is a little easier than the other, but for the most part, that doesn't matter. What matters is how you're manipulating the weapon itself. So the first technique is keeping the butt of that rifle locked into your shoulder the entire time. Keeping that locked in allows a pivot point, and it limits movement in the sense of moving parts to get back on the target accurately. So the advantage to that, and you'll see it like this, is the butt stays jammed up into my shoulder right here. As I step, that entire thing comes down and then back up and down and back up. And so the muscle memory side of that is very helpful because it's always going to be jammed into your shoulder and you're going to be ready to shoot. The disadvantage of that is very similar to what we talked about with the pistol, is as I'm coming up, I can't engage that target really until I get my sights on. And so it limits my ability to return fire until I get it all the way up. But again, it gets me into a line of sight and a muscle memory much, much faster. Now, our second technique that we do, you're going to tuck the weapon into your armpit. That's a little bit more of a preferred technique, but you'll see one of the problems with that here in just a second. So this is helpful no matter what this barrier is. Again, your buddy, a wall, anything this first technique is helpful. Your second technique, what you're doing is you're actually bringing that weapon, tucking it in under your armpit, and you can actually fire from here, very similar to what we talked about with the pistol. You're already sort of on target to the threat, so you can start to shoot as you extend this whole weapon out. So you tuck it in here. When you tuck it in here, now you have the option. You can lower it and back up, just like the first technique, or as it's tucked in, just kind of tuck it right around the wall. Bring it back, punch it out. Bring it back underneath, punch it out. And so as you do this technique, it works great for a wall, and it works great to be able to maneuver a rifle with one hand because I've got it supported under my arm and I've got a good grip with my shooting hand, and I can maneuver and manipulate a door or whatever I need to do. The disadvantage, though, is I've got to change my technique if this is my buddy. I can't flag that person like this. So the third technique, and I'll just extend my stock just a little bit here to show you, because I normally like to keep my stock compacted. So the third technique, what that involves is, as you're shooting, you bring that weapon up and totally out of the way. And this works great because now you're not flagging anything. But there's multiple moving parts. You're twisting the rifle, you're raising the rifle, you're lowering that muzzle, and then you got to get it back on target. And very similar to the first technique, I can't really return fire until I get it up on sight. So I'm down and I'm back up. The other problem I have with this is occasionally it'll catch on your shoulder. If you turn too early, that butt will catch on that shoulder on you, and it slows you down on getting it back out on target. So this is something you certainly have to practice significantly. So you're here and back out. And overall, that's a pretty good technique to use. But again, I prefer the first version. That's old school, I get it. I'm still old school, but that's kind of my preferred because it works in any situation. Again, that second technique, if I have to be the only one to open the door, or if I'm the two person that's responsible for the door, that second technique is great if I have a rifle, because then I've got it tucked in and I can, worst case scenario, at least pull the trigger and get some rounds down range to scare the threat, if not hit the threat. So the final thing we want to discuss on weapon manipulation is changing shoulders. And I'm just going to start by saying, if you don't practice this, do not do this. This is way too complicated and dangerous for somebody who doesn't practice this on a regular basis. Certainly for those that do practice it, it is great. It does limit your exposure and make it a little bit better going around a corner. But again, the reason that I say don't do this unless you practice it, we're going to go over here in just a second, those pluses and minuses on why you should and shouldn't do it. Now, I've removed my sling just for clarity for this. I've made the weapon clear and safe in the sense for the laser at this point. So let's go over switching shoulders at this time. So for starters, I'm right-handed, so we'll start on my right. In order for me to fully switch sides, I not only have to move the weapon to the opposite side, I have to switch my hands backwards. And so there's a period of time that there's not even a finger on the trigger should something occur. So trying to switch shoulders entirely is very complicated. And during that period, you have the chance of fumbling the rifle. If something should happen and you have to engage, you don't really have any aspect. There's no way to engage that. The second problem you run into if you don't practice this is, what happens when there's a malfunction? If you run out of ammo, if you jam, any of those could be a problem for you because you're not practicing this. You're used to doing it all with your right hand, reaching and releasing the magazine, etc. So on the left-hand side, what do? You're going to end up freezing and you're going to cause problems. So you either have to try and fumble through it or switch back to the opposite side. Either way, it's very dangerous if you're doing this to try and go and clear a room. So again, my recommendation is do not switch unless you do this all the time practicing. So aside from the technique I just showed on switching everything to the other side, there is another technique, and it's a little bit better for people who maybe don't practice as often, because your weapon will be here. In order to switch shoulders, just bring it to the other side. It's going to be a little awkward aiming. You're going to have to work on focusing on that non-dominant eye that you have, but everything is still here. So if there's a jam, if you have to reload, you're already in that same position to do all those maneuvers to work on any kind of a malfunction, just as if you did on this side. All the movement's the same, you're just shifted a little bit to the opposite side. So if you must do this, do it this technique. Don't completely switch sides.